have a quorum.
Yes.
Okay, just barely.
By the hair of your chin chin.
On my chin chin.
Let's go ahead and start the call. Introduce yourself.
Josh Presley.
Doug Buchanan.
Sharon Kloss.
Fred Rogers.
I think that's it. So the first item on the business is continued discussion of the land use plan, finalized compliance plan. So Michael, I think you are first on the agenda.
Am I the only item on the agenda?
You are.
Pretty
Well,
much
I'm
so,
sorry
yeah.
I wasted your evening. So I have gotten some feedback from you all. Thank you on the comp plan. My goal is for you to have the full plan, including the final land use map next month, where you will review it and make a decision, make a recommendation to your elected officials. And you'll have it in advance of your meeting, so you have a couple of weeks to review. That will include the inserts for the future land use map in the plan itself and the larger copy of the future land use map that you'll put on the wall. So there have been some questions concerning the future land use plan that I will reply to, make sure everybody has copies of that. But for the most part, it sounds like you all are comfortable with a lot of the goals. There's some fine tuning you all want, which is fine. That's why we asked the question. Because remember, this is your plan. This is not Michael's vision for what you all should be. We don't presume we have that authority, nor do we take it lightly that we're helping you figure out the best way to plan for your community. So within a couple of weeks, you'll get an email saying that the final document's been loaded to the Dropbox. Let me just stop there and ask the question. Is the Dropbox, if I can talk, is the Dropbox working for everybody?
For me.
And it's, you all are having success with it?
I need to get Jim to give me authorization to tag into it.
Okay, then that actually comes to me,
Comes to you.
and I will handle it, not a problem. So I'll just coordinate with Jim to make sure everybody's on that's supposed to be on.
So you should have the emails after
Okay, I will figure it out and find it. So thank you all for your hard work on that. I am probably a little overconfident that you'll be very happy with the final product. I know that you'll still have some modifications you'll want to make, and that's standard. But you've all put a lot of work into that plan. Your staff has put a tremendous amount of work into that plan, and I think you all ought to pat yourselves in the back, because you have worked hard and answered a lot of very difficult questions for me when it comes to your future land use map and your plan in general. Remember what that plan says about your land use policy. You are not assuming nor taking responsibility for solving the water or sewer question. That's going to be handled on a regional level. And what that partially means is your community is not going to bear the financial brunt of having to figure out where to put a wastewater treatment plant or a public water intake system. Your interest is to participate in the regional level, and it'd be a regional solution where no one community is got to bear the brunt of it. You've also indicated loud and clear, and it's in your plan, that you will only allow higher intensity land uses and higher density from a residential standpoint in those areas that you've identified in your future land use map, number one, but they have to be served by public water, public sewer. You are not pre-zoning property. Here's what I mean by that. When you look at your zoning map, look at your current future land use plan, you are not going to be identifying and rezoning property in this area to cover your downtown district. You're not creating it. You are in a reactionary mode, meaning someone has to come to you and demonstrate that they're compliant with your comprehensive plan for you to do the rezoning. One of the big mistakes a lot of communities make, and yes, I have worked in those communities, and yes, I have advocated doing things a certain way because that's what the elected officials want, and I won't apologize for that. What I will say is, our mantra is let those interested property owners that want to do development, let them initiate the process and you react to it. You should always be in a somewhat reactionary mode. You don't need to be pre-zoning, pre-doing anything. Let the market dictate how that works. If you find that you only have one or two people interested, for example, in rezoning this area near the town hall to help support additional non-residential development, aka the downtown district, as we're sort of alluding to, that's perfectly fine, and that's all you get. You are only going to be reacting to people as they come in with voluntary requests only after they've demonstrated compliance with the comp plan and they can show they can meet your ordinance. Now, one other important issue that I'm going to browbeat into you a little bit, and I'm going to steal a lot of Jim's thunder, so you can blame me, I can be the bad guy.
Jim said he was king.
That'll work too. But this came up last night in another jurisdiction, and I apologize in advance because this is a pineapple to a banana comparison, but I think you'll understand where I'm going with this. So Vance County, which is north of Durham, we are updating their Unified Development Ordinance. We're also about to start their comprehensive plan. They actually wanted two separate processes, which is fine. They had an individual approach the county staff about rezoning 100 acres of property to light industrial. Well, on the surface, there's nothing wrong with that. The request was consistent with the comprehensive plan. The request was consistent with the future growth strategy for the county as embodied in their current comprehensive plan. So everybody just kind of said, okay, well, that's fine. Then the problem happened. What was the problem? Somebody alluded that 100-acre tract of land, and just for purposes of me pointing to the map, let's say it's right here in terms of Fairview's area. Let's say this is an industrial zone, okay? Just for purposes of this illustration. Somebody let it slip that that was going to be a data center. Everybody know what a data center is? Mm-hmm. Okay. They're nasty. I don't begrudge people that want to open data centers, but they are huge utility users. And communities have to plan for that. Well, now here comes the problem. Several years ago, Vance County asked Infocus to help them with the text amendment to allow data centers in their light industrial zoning district. We made recommendations at that time on certain standards being incorporated. County board, as they're consistent with their authority, said, we're not concerned, we're not interested, we don't want this, okay? So you're going to allow the land use, it's going to be permitted by right, meaning staff has to review and approve a site plan, demonstrating compliance with the code, parking, landscaping, etc. Everybody still with me? Well, local residents didn't like that answer. So last night they had a special public hearing to make a decision on that acreage and they rezoned it, much to the chagrin of everybody in the audience. Why? Because it was consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan. It was in an area the county had specifically identified as being for industrial purposes, being for economic development activity. It was served by utilities. And the county's correct argument, albeit I understand it was not satisfactory to those in attendance, the county's correct argument was there's 50 land uses allowed in that district. Yes, everybody's heard the rumor it's going to be a data center. There's no application, no documentation. There's nothing in our possession that says it's going to be a data center. We can't base a zoning decision on that rumor. We can only base zoning decisions on does it comply with the comprehensive plan or not. The answer is it did. Now, why am I going through that little story with you? As you are implementing your new comprehensive plan, remember that the future land use map gives you the ability to say where you want to see certain categories, types, and intensities of development. If I come to you and say, well, you've identified a commercial node, I want to rezone it to this commercial district. Okay. Your first question is it consistent with the future land use map? Is it consistent with the goals and policies of that comp plan? Doesn't matter what land uses go in there. That's a totally separate process. All you are going to be responding to as the planning board is looking at a statement of consistency, making a recommendation on a statement of consistency. Does this request meet comprehensive plan? This is one of the big reasons we tell our communities don't pre-zone areas. Let an applicant come to you and react to it. Why? Because you still have a modicum of control over what's happening. If you pre-zone areas, then there is no opportunity for review. You've already done the action. So you're now at the mercy of that person coming in, and he or she can develop one of the 50 land uses in the district. Please, I'm sorry.
That's exactly my point with the high density. One thing, our soil router will take it once. We need to stick to our plan, that's R40, an acre or more, or 1 to 4 family. I think you just proved to my point, we don't need to say, hey, down the road, we think this area is good for high density. We just don't have the soil or the stuff out here that would ever absorb high density, so we need to stick to our plan, R40 and 1 to 4 family.
Right, and I'm not saying you shouldn't stick to your plan, but what I am saying is that you have enough goals, policies, and initiatives in this comp plan that we put together for you that says you're only going to encourage and promote or even allow or even give consideration to requests where it's backed by the availability of public utility. So to me, you're not setting yourself up to fail, Fred, although I respect what you're saying, and I agree with you for 90% of your community. But I do think that you have some obligation, since this is the future land use plan, to identify those initial areas where you might consider it if you meet all these conditions. And if you don't meet all these conditions, guess what? You don't get a favorable recommendation or an affirmative finding by the board because you don't meet the requirements of the code or the plan itself. So this doesn't commit you to allowing that type of development. It just commits that you would allow it under these very unique circumstances.
But if we've got 90% that don't, then why even open that floodgate? Why not just say, we're not gonna do it? That way, case closed.
Because then you don't have to amend your comp plan as your plans change over the course of 10 or 15 years. You've actually planned for it, and you've restricted where it can go, and you're not reacting to development pressure. You plan for potential development pressure. And again, I respect that you and I have a difference of opinion, which doesn't make you wrong, me right, or vice versa. And I don't.
My opinion, and I agree with that, and I appreciate that. And you're right, I respect what you've done, and I think we should go with what the community has said. They don't want high density housing out here, and I think we should not have that in our ordinance at all.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a risk, though, if we don't allow it at all, that opens the door for someone to say, your plan isn't comprehensive, it's not, it doesn't allow for X, Y, Z, and therefore, because you don't even give this category consideration, we can get in under some other.
The state of North Carolina would be our risk.
They do that.
Well, there's a lot of people that are your risk, but you are correct in identifying the one chief player in the room. The direct answer to your question is yes and no. Let me explain why I say it that way. I'm right now working in a community that's under a federal lawsuit by the NAACP, who's suing this community for the exact same reason we're talking about, that they don't allow any higher intensity housing in their jurisdiction. And they don't have water sewer either. In fact, they have advocated not having water sewer. They want to preserve their community at a 1-to-1, meaning a 1 dwelling unit per acre, or even 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. And they're now under a threat of federal lawsuit unless they plan for areas where you could see higher density housing. Why? Because the argument is the community is unaffordable for minorities to live in. Now, that's a lot of the impetus behind my recommendation, that I want you all to avoid the trap of finding yourself on the wrong end of somebody making an accusation that Fairview has decided to be exclusionary. If you or Fred here or Sharon are asking me, is there a state law? No. But there has been talk for the last 5 years at the General Assembly of them mandating density in areas. And bluntly, I'm planning for that inevitability. And yes, on some level, I get to be a little unpopular, and I accept that. It doesn't make me right. It doesn't make Fred here wrong in his concern. And I'm never going to tell you not to have that concern or express it or say, Michael, can't we do X, Y, Z? I'm happy to accommodate what you all need. I appreciate the fact you're listening to me and are trying to make an informed decision, because I know this is difficult. It's tough from the standpoint that this is changing a little bit of the status quo, but one of the reasons I'm adamant that you don't pre-zone areas is you avoid some of that. You force the developer to come to you showing how they are going to comply with the code and comply with the comp plan in order to allow this higher intensity development to occur. And personally, I think that sets you up for a greater opportunity for success, because you're in a reactionary mode. You're not in a panic mode of having to reply and respond to someone making a legal challenge to you not being inclusive enough. Now, I'm going to tell you all what you already know. You can be sued for anything in this state, and it's frustrating as all get out. Planning staff, zoning officers are no longer covered under qualified immunity under state law. So we have to be very methodic in what we do. Not that we were cavalier to begin with, but now we have a heightened degree of concern that we're going to somehow be declared, well, you violated my rights. Well, no. I went through the methodic process, spelled out in not only general statute, but the local code on how to do X, Y, Z. Remember, state law was amended some time ago to allow for individuals who've had projects denied to sue the community to get their investment back. One of the reasons we're giving you a more detailed methodic land use plan is to help you plan for that inevitability, give you the stronger ability to say no, or to say you can't do it until you show us X, Y, Z.
It's the developer and the homeowner that could sue here.
Oh, yeah, yes, well, you can be sued by anybody,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
be blunt, I think we all know that, but remember that developers now have the ability to show damages to the court, and you all as at Fairview would be responsible economically to pay that. I have yet in my career had somebody successfully show that they've been denied their rights. Has it happened? Yes. There's a rather infamous case right now. I'm not sure where it is in the process. An unnamed Eastern North Carolina county, won't be hard to Google it, decided to deny a solar facility. And somebody during the meeting, and let me just add parenthetically, please never, ever do this. But somebody said during the meeting, well, we all met earlier to look at this plan, this request, and this was in a quasi-judicial hearing. This isn't a special use permit hearing. We all met earlier and discussed this. Well, number one, that's violation of open meetings law. That's also a violation of ex parte communication. They denied the solar facility and said, yeah, we just don't want it. And the attorney, who I work with all the time in High Point, said, okay, show me in your comp plan where it's not consistent. We don't care what the comp plan says. We're telling you to hit the bricks. Would you say that just a little louder for me, please, and make sure you're speaking into the microphone? And I'm being somewhat facetious, but it was that cavalier level of egging, you know, I'm going to egg you on and make sure you say stuff on the record. Well, guess what? They're going to be sued. I think they're trying to now do mediation to resolve that lawsuit. My humble opinion is the solar facility is going exactly where it was. There's going to be some level of compensation to cover attorney's costs. And the community that said don't want it, they're about to eat it.
Yeah, I think my question came up just with the lower participation in the survey.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that aggressive? 70-some people out of 3,400 replied. Does that really give us enough of a voice to say, you know, to not have different?
Well, I'm going to say something, and then Doug, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. It is important to have public input. We've gotten public input. Is it enough public input? What's enough? And the only good thing I can tell you is the statute does not specifically mandate you have to have 10% of participation to do a comp plan. It doesn't mandate that at all. It just says it has to be an open process, and this has been an open process. So unfortunately, part of my cavalier response to you is that if your neighbors chose not to participate in the survey that we released and be active participants in the planning for their town, they get what they get.
But a lot of times, the way those surveys come, I didn't know anything about a survey, and I've lived out here for years. I never, the only survey I know is when we had the mass building they proposed, and out of the whole neighborhood, 3,200 people showed up against that. So, you were there when you got, I mean, so any other survey I never heard of, and I've lived out here and I get emails from everywhere, so I never heard of any other surveys. So, depends on how, they may have been sent out like, hey, you know, it just depends, you know, people get what they want on these things too, so.
I guess one of the things, especially when I talk to my guys, you make decisions. It can't be based upon personal feelings.
Yep.
Because it got to be upon facts and written documentation. And a lot for us, pictures are wonderful. But opinions, they're worthless.
Yeah.
Now, I will caveat that, since I'm a professional engineer, my opinion means something, but I try to keep it limited to next to nothing.
It's a compliment.
Well, the stuff, but I mean, and that's what Mike was trying to do. He's trying to put the information in our plan, so we have something tangible
Yeah.
to
No, I
talk
agree.
about.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the way to go.
Yeah.
Hang on, it's no, like Michael said too, and he's brought up some good points. Anybody can come to the planning board for us to take to the county commission on if I want to build a 5,000 foot skyscraper, you know, I can bring it, so I have one to do it. But, so anything, you know, bring it to the board and let us, you know.
And we can take it through that process, and one of the reasons we're as detailed as we are in your comp plan, and I know you all appreciate this, is this does not meet this policy, this policy, this policy, this policy, this policy, so we are obligated to say no.
Yeah, I think that I was just reacting more to, you know, you brought up the discrimination issue, and I just, you know, we've spent a lot of our money.
Well, and again,
dealing with these types of issues over the last couple of years, and so, you know, I think having potentially designating a place for whatever, you can still say no, is what I was
Yeah.
reacting to.
well, and you all have asked that I designate these areas for continued study.
Yeah.
And that's how your comp plan is going to be worded and written, so that you're not committing yourself, you're just saying.
That's a good point, Michael.
Yeah.
I mean, just say we would put that in there as something that we would continue to study, yeah.
Yeah, but right now, you're identifying this area as the only area you would consider, but only under these circumstances, and you're continuing to study it. I mean, that's what Fred brought up the last meeting we had, talked about this, and you all had agreed that's kind of the direction you wanted, which is the direction we're headed. So I think once you see the future land use map at your next meeting, some of these concerns will be addressed, which doesn't mean you still don't have the right to tell me you think I'm wrong, or you'd rather have the language tweaked this way. I mean, that's part of this process. So the comment is valuable. The concern is real. I hear it. I do think, honestly, Fred, we're giving you some tools to address that, but I respect the fact you reserve rights, so to your comrades here, your colleagues, to tell me you think I missed the mark a little bit, let's do it this way, which that's why we're doing this. So you're going to have a couple more bites at this apple, but I think a lot of your concerns will be addressed when you see the final map next meeting time. And as long as you trust me just enough to get you the documents so you can further review it, I think we are where we are. And I think that you all have a comfort level knowing you're going to get a document that you can comment on and you know you're going to be made comfortable as I can make you in the confines of state law.
And can I add something here too? One thing that's very important to understand is InFocus is bringing you two different documents. One is a policy document. One is a regulatory document. And by identifying or receive areas on that policy document, gives you guidelines to say, yes, these areas are probably the better areas of the town for these particular type of uses. However, what Michael's trying to say is you don't want to go and you don't want to change the zoning districts on the zoning map to reflect that, because if you leave the zoning as it is today, even though you identify an area as a receive area, They still have to go through a legislative process to rezone the property. And you still have the right to turn it down.
If it doesn't meet the criteria of your plan, because you do have enough policies in your plan that it's not a carte blanche rubber stamp approval. So we're going to point back to this area, identified as sort of your core downtown area. That's what it is in your current future land use plan. Well, number one, it's not going to be this big of an area on the final map because you've all asked me to make it reasonable. There are conditions in your comp plan that have been built into this that give you the ability to say, well, we wanted to encourage additional non-residential development, but under these conditions, and we don't believe those conditions have been met yet. So we're not encouraging or promoting any additional development at this time. If you want this development, there's going to have to be A, B, C, D, and E done. This comp plan will give you some of those outs. So if you don't have a comfort level, you have policy initiatives that allow you to make a negative finding or a negative recommendation. Clear as mud, right?
I get it.
So we hopefully will be putting that to bed next month. I'm having a devil of a time playing with the future land use map only because I'm taking all your comments from last meeting and those that have been emailed to me in consideration about making sure that the districts are logical. Meaning, you don't want me to create a commercial or an employment district that's just this huge 500-acre circle. And then you're stuck with, well, why was this property included? Why was that property included? You want some sense of logic. It needs to be logical in terms of where that district is. So you've asked for that. You don't want this. I don't want to give you that because I don't think that serves you any purpose at all. So I'm making some decisions, obviously, based on existing land uses and based on existing development patterns. And you ultimately have the final say as you're making your recommendation to the elected officials. It's not just because Michael says so, and you know that, and I appreciate you know that. So, were there any other questions on the comp plan?
One of the things I was reading through the master plan was talking about having the kids, the children, to continue residing in the town of Fairview. And I think I sent this in an email.
Yep.
Why would they want to? And I think one of the biggies, if you ever go past the sports complex, places utilized massively.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I would want to try and put on the comp plan itself, some identification of that. And of course, water and sewer would almost be a must for that point in time.
Well, it becomes a must at a certain level. If the property is large enough and the soil is decent enough, you could probably have a smaller scale project like you're talking about on well and septic. It's just going to have to be a larger swath of property. And you'll have to address that when it comes before you. Is it reasonable? Is it not reasonable? Remember, we're going to get into obviously reviewing very quickly subdivisions because I want to give you time to look at it instead of me just telling you what's in it. Remember that InFocus is recommending, and your staff, I don't want to speak for them, but obviously Ed was comfortable and was recommending it. It's Jim's responsibility now, and I'll let him speak for himself. They were comfortable with the flexible development cluster subdivision concept. It allows you to cluster lots. But remember, you can't increase density. So if you have, Jim, these are all erasable, correct?
Should be.
I'll check before I do something stupid. Yep. If you have this 100-acre tract of land, and let's say there's floodplain right here, and some stream buffer and natural area. What the cluster subdivision process allows you to do is if you were normally allowed a 40,000 square foot lot, you could reduce your lots to, let's say, 21,780, half an acre. And put your lots in one central area or a couple central areas of the project. Now you know why I'm a planner, I suck at art. cul-de-sac. And then the rest of the property is preserved as open space. The presumption is that you're gonna have adequate soils on that property for well and septic. You can't do this without you demonstrating to the town that you've got viable well and septic locations on your parcel, which is ultimately determined by the health department or even the state or a soil scientist. But your policies run hand in hand with one another. Just because we say you can do a cluster development, as the example I'm using, you still have to demonstrate you comply with the code. And if the code says you gotta have well septic, including repair for your septic area, and you need a 35,000 square foot lot to do that, well then guess what your lot size is? 35,000 square foot. There's no way around that. But the benefit for the cluster subdivision from my standpoint is it preserves natural area where it's not gonna be graded, it's not gonna be disturbed. You have the potential for rec amenities, which I know you all have talked about, wanting to encourage and promote. And it ensures that the integrity of the property is going to be maintained. You're not having to mass grade the parcel to accommodate road networks. So that's my big pitch when it comes to why cluster subdivisions make sense. I know that Union County, Jim has reminded me on a couple of occasions, Union County has a similar provision. And it works in their context because they have the same provisions that we're recommending you have. Got to demonstrate that you have septic and well. You cannot escape that. There's no way around that. And if your lot doesn't perk, you can't develop it as you've laid it out. You got to go back to the drawing board. You ultimately still have that tool in your toolbox to say you can't move forward until you show us you comply with all applicable local regulations, not just in your UDO, but in your comp plan that show that lot has development potential. That's just something to keep in mind as we continue to walk forward.
You considering a community well or individual wells?
Right now, the ordinance doesn't talk to community well system, but I'm going to tell you what you already know, Doug. State of North Carolina says they can approve a package treatment system or community well, and it's up to the local HOA to maintain it.
That's why I'm afraid of these developments like that. What if somebody says, well, you know, we'll come in and do that and put her on a low pressure system or whatever, on the sewer system. You know, so I don't like it.
I hear you.
I don't like it. There's no need to put that in here for the soil that we have in Fairview. We need to stick to 40,000 square foot or 1 to 4 acres. If you can't get it to perk on an acre, sorry, I'm trying to do it. You know?
On that scenario, your septic tank fills would be on the outside perimeter.
Yeah.
It won't fit on in at a half acre.
If you had a low pressure system and you was to have the trash to be,
I've actually managed subdivision projects through the cluster subdivision that have on-site septic where we don't allow off-site septic. So it has well and on-site septic and repair on a 21,000 square foot lot. Now granted, this is in a county where the soils work for that project. And we took them through the development review process. I'm not saying that's going to always happen here, just like everywhere you rely on a well and septic system, it's a shooting match in terms of will you comply or will you not comply. So there's going to be parcels where the cluster subdivision concept just isn't going to work because you don't have the soil. Well, then guess what? You don't get to do it. And that's built into your code. Where you have the ability to do it, it makes sense to allow, in at least my personal opinion, that allows for reasonable clustering so that you're actually preserving and protecting larger swaths of property in its natural setting.
You can't get more protection than 40,000 square feet out here. If we stick to our ordinance of 40,000 square feet, you're protected. If we don't, we're not protected. That's simple.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. You and I, unfortunately, are going to have a philosophical difference for reasons which I respect the fact you've heard and you understand.
Right.
I know you don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I understand. I appreciate the fact you at least see the other side of it. So
yeah. I mean, I'm basing it on, we got something from the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission that actually backs our 40,000 1 acre. And we got a very rare hill splitter mussel here, and we need to take that into consideration too.
But that's always going to be taken into consideration when you're looking at projects, because it still is going to have to go through that methodic process for review and approval. And in those instances where it makes no sense, it's not going to happen, because the ordinance won't let it happen. So, and again, I'm sorry, I jumped into the subdivision only to provide an example. Were there any other comments or questions on the comp plan? I know that you all are kind of anxious to see your future land use map. I appreciate the comments I've gotten. Please continue to send me. I'm only going to ask you to do it through Jim or Ed, because I need to make sure that the staff is kept in the loop. Not that I don't like talking to you, but I don't need to exclude Jim or Ed in these conversations. So I appreciate you understanding that. So with subdivisions, what I'll remind you is this. Right now, your subdivision ordinance is 5 pages in total length. It doesn't necessarily address standards in terms of how a subdivision is developed. It doesn't address very well how they're classified, which gets real important with state law. The biggest thing and the biggest change we have is ensuring that you have minimum design standards for blocks, lengths of blocks and width of blocks, and where right-of-ways has to go, and what's considered suitable property for development. You don't want somebody basically cutting up lots in a floodplain and saying, oh, that's developable. No, it's not. But your code doesn't necessarily address all those issues yet. The other thing your code doesn't do, in my opinion, when we get to 7.4, no subdivision until compliance with applicable law, you can't use or occupy a divided parcel of property until you've met all local, state, and federal requirements, whatever those are. Now for you, that's zoning. That's also your flood damage prevention ordinance. From the state level, that is having viable septic locations, viable well locations. And Fred, from the Fed, that gets to the memo you were just talking about, which is also at the state level. So it's a multi-function process to ensure that your reasonable use of property as a developer doesn't have a negative impact either on the local environment or the local community or your neighbors. So we put a lot of teeth into your subdivision ordinance. Whoops, it would help if I got out of that. No sale or transfer. You're not going to be allowed to sell or transfer lots until the final approval. Remember that state law allows for what's known as pre-sale contracts. You have an approved preliminary plat, meaning that you know this is how the subdivision is going to look. This is before everything's developed. You can actually pre-sell those lots. Problem is they can't transfer until the final plat is signed and recorded at the Register of Deeds, legally creating the parcel. But under current state law, and yes, you can thank the General Assembly, under current state law, you can actually pre-sell lots. My concern with that has always been, well, you pre-sell lots. If you don't sell enough lots and you're relying on the pre-sale to fund the project, then you don't have a project. My opinion fell on a lot of deaf ears in Raleigh. You never would have thought, but it did. So we have incorporated what the existing state rules allow, because bluntly, they're going to have to follow the state law anyway. You don't have the authority to say no. If state law says they can do it, they can do it. No subdivision can be recorded without prior approval by the town. You talk about voluntary ag districts, and I appreciate Sharon asking me, do you need to worry about it? But my only response is, since you as a community continue to recognize and want to encourage the preservation of ag area within your confines, within your corporate limits, you do need to have some reference to the VAD. The voluntary ag district process is a state process where somebody can actually get tax credits and create conservation area to preserve and protect farmland long term. Has to be recorded within the Register of Deeds office, and people have to be notified. They'll be notified using your county GIS system that there is a VAD, or voluntary ag district property, within a half mile of their parcel. Why is that important? Remember that bona fide farms and voluntary ag districts have lots of protections under the state rules, especially dealing with nuisance issues. Farms are the only protected land use class in North Carolina. I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. It's reality. But what comes with that is, obviously you have a neighbor who's a farmer and they're a pig farmer, or they're a chicken farmer, and let's be blunt, in June and July, the odor can get interesting. It protects the farmer from unnecessary nuisance complaints and nuisance suits, because nobody has to come to Jim and file a legal complaint about odor or nuisance issues. They can actually go right to the court system. So the law exists to protect the farmer from unnecessary litigation. It's not a bad thing, it's just reality, and it's state law. So we are providing you some tools to make sure that you are successful. Permanent reference points. There used to be a provision of the state law that established how that was done. It was eliminated. So now we rely on the State Board of Registration for Professional Engineers and Surveyors, who establishes a policy on how permanent reference points are established. Why is it important to have that in your code? Because Jim needs to be able to have the authority to go out and say, I don't see where your reference points are. I've got your map, I'm looking, I don't see them. You are obligated to have your reference points out here so somebody can understand where the lots are. It's a check to make sure the surveyor is doing his or her job. We have provided you language dealing with the phasing of subdivisions, as well as how you're dealing with performance guarantees. What's a performance guarantee? Somebody doesn't have the money to install all the required landscaping, or let's say put in sidewalk that they proposed, they can post a bond with you. Why is that important? Because state law gives them that right. And you need to basically have the tool in your toolbox to make sure, number one, they can't claim you're not following state law. But number two, your staff is going to have some administrative ability to say, nope, we need it this way. That's it. And remember, state law does not allow the unit of local government to choose what that performance guarantee is. It could be cash, could be a letter of credit, could be a deposit on a check. You don't get to dictate what that is anymore. You used to be able to about 12 years ago. And then fun was had by all, the General Assembly. Yes, I'm jaded. I know I'm jaded, and that's okay. Maintenance requirements. This was a big concern when I first got here and started meeting with you. Defining who's responsible for maintaining what in a development, in a subdivision. Well, it's ultimately the developer's responsibility. When that developer leaves, after a certain point, it becomes the HOA's responsibility. And people need to be put on notice that that's their responsibility. Before a road is accepted by DOT for maintenance, you obviously need a certain amount of density in that subdivision to make it work for DOT. They won't take that road if it doesn't meet their density requirements. I've actually had subdivisions that have been platted for 20 years, didn't meet density until 20 years in, and then the road needed $1 million worth of improvements to bring it up to DOT standard. And the homeowners association said, well, we're ready, it needs to be turned over. DOT, you have to bring it up to the applicable standard to allow us to take it. That's a bitter pill to swallow. Part of the reason we've incorporated a lot of this into your code is so that you're putting everybody on notice. It's not the town of Fairview that's going to take over this situation. It's you. And yes, that presumes they've read the code. And I know the likelihood of that because I've done this 30 years. But
The builder's done.
you can at least say, here it is.
Yeah.
Here it is in the document. We put you on notice.
And even if you put the bylaws in or write something that says the builder, he can always file bankruptcy and start another company. And
Yep.
You're still back on you to handle it.
And two ways we try to address that is we require what's called a subdivision agreement, and I'm going to provide your staff with a document, a template. What that document does is effectively make sure, as recorded with the subdivision, it spells out how this development is approved, are there any conditions associated with it, and who does what. And it's recorded along with the plat. So if you ever do a title search on the property, you find it, and you can say, oh, A, B, C. Ooh, I don't want to maintain that road until DOT takes it over. Well, then you might be looking somewhere else for a parcel. I happen to champion the subdivision agreement construct because I think it gives you all a get out of jail free card. People are always going to come to the town to complain about something. We all know that. I'm not trying to make light of it. But this at least gives the staff the ability to say, well, this is the agreement that was filed. This is what the developer agreed to. And if you buy the lot, you're subject to this. We're not doing X, Y, Z because this document says we're not doing X, Y, Z. Sorry, but I pay taxes. Yes, you do. And just because you pay taxes doesn't mean the state highway patrol doesn't pull you over for speeding. You pay your taxes for town services. That service does not include us maintaining the subdivision that's spelled out in this agreement. Yes, I'm accused of being evil a lot, but I sleep well at night. Suitability of land. You have certain provisions in your code dealing with this. They're not very explicit. We've made them explicit. So obviously, special flood hazard area, floodplain is not suitable. Why? Because it floods. Yeah, I know, who would have thought? But septic and well evaluation. Every project has to be evaluated for well and septic. Now, we all know that if Union County Health turns down a parcel, somebody can go to a private soil scientist and get an engineered system. That's fine. That would still be permitted, but you've gone through the process. And you've shown and can document that this lot can be served, and that's the important part. Drainage and topography. What you don't want to do is somebody have to destroy an existing parcel to make it work. That's one of the reasons drainage and topography becomes a big issue. Lots, how they're oriented, shaped, and designed. Block requirements. You don't really have a lot of that currently. Flag lot. One of the things we've done is provide graphic representation how a flag lot has to look. There has to be a minimum frontage on the street. There's a maximum depth, and here's your parcel. Right now, your ordinance doesn't really have much to explain how that happens. And somebody,
I'm sorry.
no, please.
Where do those requirements come from? Is that something that you've designed, or does that come from North Carolina?
No, something we've designed.
Okay.
There is no unique North Carolina recognized standard. It's communities can have their own standard. I've made recommendations just based on my experience.
If we adopt your recommendation, someone comes in and develops and wants to tweak it in another design or another, change some of that footage.
Yep.
Is that permitted?
They would have to do a formal text amendment and go through the process to amend your ordinance, which means you would have to make a recommendation. The town council would have to make a final decision. We deal with erosion sedimentation control. Access to roadways, you got to have frontage on the appropriate street system. We encourage coordinated street system, meaning instead of having one central drive every 200 or 300 feet, we actually encourage and promote connectivity. It lowers traffic issues on main thoroughfares, main roadways. We deal with road standards. Everything that you all have is going to be effectively developed in a 50-foot right-of-way unless it's an exempt subdivision. Meeting DOT requirements. We do have some private road standards that we are recommending you consider, but anything over 21 lots, we recommend that has to be a public road.
What determines a public road?
It's built to DOT requirements. So the blunt answer is you got a 50-foot right of way, you have a certain amount of pavement. It's going to be anywhere from 18 to 22 feet based on the category of subdivision, and it has to be aggregate, and the actual design of the road has to meet DOT minimum engineering specs.
And don't have to be a certain number of residents.
At some point, it has to be a certain number of residents for DOT to take it over. But in terms of the design criteria, no, we're perfectly legal doing it this way. And this tracks a lot of your current code. You have to get a certificate of construction, meaning somebody has to prove to you that the road was built the way it was supposed to be. What a concept. Travelway, we have a typical shoulder classification. We prohibit fill material unless it's there to raise the road bed, but you have to compact it to meet DOT specs. Vertical clearance, you've got to make sure that you have a travelway cleared of tree limbs that trucks, vehicles can safely navigate the street system. Turnarounds, we defer typically to state fire code. In instances where the state fire code may not have an applicable standard, we are recommending one. That's only if DOT and the state fire marshal say, nope, we want it done this way. You just establish a minimum, a baseline. 99 times out of 100, bluntly, it's going to be whatever DOT says. Why? Because a lot of your roads are going to be turned over to DOT, and DOT is going to say, nope, we want this. And it will not surprise anybody in this room to know that the Department of Transportation and the state fire code as relates to fire vehicular access don't agree with one another. And DOT says, well, we don't care what the fire code says. If you want us to take your road over, this is what the cul-de-sac design is going to be. And the state fire marshal says, well, wait a minute. We have a fire code that says X, Y, Z. We don't care. You're going to maintain the road? It's much more fun when it's actually happening in person and the two people are actually getting a little reared up, and it's, you know, the froth is flying, and it's like, they're going to come to blows. And I'm not trying to be facetious. I've actually had meetings where state fire code officials and DOT officials have. Yes.
Do you reference sight distance at intersections?
Yes.
Okay.
That's going to actually be covered in a different chapter, but yes, we have a sight distance requirement, and it meets the DOT minimum.
I was surprised how it changed 2 years ago.
Yep.
What did it change from?
Oh, you know, now it's related back to the speed of the road itself.
Yep.
So I was building something off of 601, it classified as 60 miles an hour. Sight distance was 600 feet.
Yep.
Yeah. I ain't having it.
We've also got all of your notes that are required for plats in here. I'm going to rely on Jim to tell me how he wants those to read. We've come up with some basics. The local staff's going to tell me how they want it to read, but remember, there's certain aspects of state code that dictate that to you and for you. So I will be as and will identify for you where I can't be accommodating. That's a lot to take in, I know, but that's why we're giving you a month to review subdivision and ask me any questions. And again, all I ask is that you get your comments to Jim or Ed, and we go through it through the process that way, so that the staff is kept abreast, so they can respond to you if they think that they should be the ones responding versus me. It's not that I don't like talking to you, I love it, but I don't want to cut your staff out of the loop. So where we're going from here, you're going to continue to review subdivision. The next couple of weeks, we're downloading the remaining chapters of your code. We got to deal with signage, landscaping, and parking. Not a lot of changes are coming, but I am going to make sure your sign ordinance is content neutral and complies with the U.S. Supreme Court decision. So there are going to be changes to your sign code. Are we allowing a tremendous amount of signage beyond what you allow now? No. But I do have to make sure you're content neutral, meaning that I'm not going to have you sued because the ordinance I wrote put you in harm's way. And the U.S. Supreme Court, just like every other bureaucracy, changes their mind and makes my life even more interesting than it needs to be. I'll give you an example. I'm not supposed to be able to look at a sign, read its content, to determine anything about that sign.
Yeah, but how are you going to tell if it's off premise or not?
Well, that goes to the next U.S. Supreme Court case. The next U.S. Supreme Court case, and I'm talking about Reed v. Gilbert. Reed v. Gilbert was what started this whole rigmarole. Reed v. Gilbert was a town, it deals with a community in Arizona where the zoning officer at the time looked at a sign that advertised off-site directions to I believe it was a farmer's market, and said that's illegal. That's off-site advertising. It's a snipe sign. And the darndest thing was right next to that sign, and I wish this was hyperbole, it's not. There was a directional sign for a church. Same size, same issue, it's directing people to go somewhere. But the zoning officer did not cite the church, didn't pull up the sign. So the people that put up the sign advertising where to go for this farmer's market said, wait a minute, it's the same sign. You made a determination and a decision based on your perception of the content of that sign wasn't legal. But this sign, which does the exact same thing, is perfectly legal, be discriminated against. And the U.S. Supreme Court correctly, I'm not besmirching them so much, I'll besmirch them more in a minute, but they said no, zoning officers can't look at a sign and just decide on a whim that because that sign says, come to the Methodist Church of Christ for worship, Well, I'm not a Methodist, I'm a Baptist, I hate Methodists. That sign is illegal, it's coming up. That's what it's designed to avoid. Making arbitrary and capricious decisions based on content and perceived errors in that content. So, we have to have sign ordinances that are content neutral. You can regulate size, you can regulate location, you can regulate number. You can't regulate what that sign says, with a couple notable exceptions, even in the Supreme Court case. If it's offensive language, you can regulate the living daylights out of that, but you're not regulating it as part of your sign code, you're regulating it as part of your police power.
First Amendment, freedom of speech.
Yes, yeah, sorry, freedom of speech, correct. But if you have a profane statement in your sign, that you don't have the freedom to be profane. You have the freedom to have your hands slapped. Now, the Supreme Court has also said you can't look at the content of the sign to determine what constitutes on-site or off-site advertising. That was in Reed v. Gilbert. About a year and a half later, he said, well, we're going to rethink that. We're going to say that a zoning officer can look at the content of the sign to determine what the intent of the sign is. Is it meant to be off-site advertising, i.e. a billboard, or is it meant to be on-site, meaning it is subject to different standards? They're not regulating the sign based on content, but content can form the basis to determine what function that sign serves. Now, while that sounds interesting, and it sounds like it clears some things up, let me tell you how many McDonald's have billboards that say, come eat at McDonald's. And they look at you, that's an off-site advertising sign, because we have McDonald's all over the place. It's not advertising this one specific McDonald's. It's advertising every McDonald's. And that's usually when I go in my car and cry for a while. But that's where we are now as it relates to the regulation of signage. And I just need to make sure your ordinance is content neutral. It is not content neutral right now. No offense. You are a great company. There's a lot of other communities in the state that are still regulated based on content. You ain't gonna do that anymore, because you can't.
Are you going to have a section on the neon lights?
Yes and no. So in lighting, I'm going to talk about you can't turn your building into a billboard, but you can't, under the provisions of the State Enabling Act, you just can't prohibit all, let's say, accent lighting on a building. I believe that I can limit that lighting so you don't have, and sorry, I'm singling somebody out, but they seem to be the worst perpetrator of this. A vape shop can't turn their building into a glowing billboard advertising vape products.
I'm thinking about the sign that has the flashing neon, the scrolling neon lights that has been linked to being a distraction for drivers.
Well, there are going to be provisions. There are provisions in your current code. We're going to maintain them, no flashing or blinking lights, unless it's an emergency road assistance light. Emergency road assistance sign, which they're exempt from your code anyway. So if DOT puts on a road saying slow down, accident ahead, and it's meant to flash to get your attention, even though it takes your attention off the road, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. What it can't be is the gas station down here.
Yeah.
A beacon is what we call it. So no, that will exist.
Okay.
And we've also got to redo your definitions. We need to modernize your definitions a little bit.
Just a thought I had to some of Fred's concerns about the overall plan and then the potentially subdivision is, I'm aware of Charlotte's like tree save ordinances. I mean, do smaller communities have anything similar to that?
Yes and no. So we're going to have some landscape standards for you. But to get a tree preservation ordinance or an ordinance that mandates a certain percentage of trees on site, you actually have to go to the General Assembly and get enabling legislation. You're not doing that. What I am doing is indicating that you have to have a certain percentage of open space on your property. You have to preserve, for example, parking lots have to have a certain number of canopy trees for every 6 or 10 parking spaces to help provide canopy cover meaning it's going to shield the parking lot, but it also means that you're not just totally blowing out the site. That's a sea of asphalt. So some of that will exist. And remember, setbacks typically have to be buffered. So that's going to be maintained in your code.
I have horror stories with Charlotte's forestry department. Which includes making me plant a tree that you couldn't get because you can't transplant it. I don't encourage that.
Well, on one end of the spectrum, and I'm not trying to make light of this, but I am going to use another client as an example. In fact, I'm using two clients as an example. At one end of the spectrum, I have a client whose local residents effectively want me to say you have to have 80% lot coverage in trees and only allow 20% of development activity. Well, that's not legal. That's not going to fly. We are proposing somewhere in the middle to meet to try to address everybody's concerns, although I'm not going to make a whole segment of the population happy. And another end of the spectrum, and this is actually a municipality. First example was the county. I have a municipality that could care less if you're mowing down trees. Just go ahead and do what you got to do. We're okay with it. The concern now is, though, that enough of the residents are saying, well, I don't want to have to look at a commercial parking lot. Why can't there be a buffer? Okay, a 5-foot buffer. I don't know, it actually needs to be proportional to the intensity of the project versus the adjacent zone. So you're going to have a lot of that in your code. Am I going to make everybody happy with respect to that? Probably not, and I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. But I am at least going to give you a tool that I think preserves and protects some of what you're looking for. You also don't want to have to hire the staff necessary to do a proactive tree protection save ordinance, because Charlotte has an army of foresters. And they have the taxes to cover that. I don't think that's.
They don't mind spending your dollars.
Yes. Yeah. They know how to spend your dollars better than you know how to spend your dollars. Yes. And I'm not trying to be rude to Charlotte.
I'm not either. They even admit it, so.
They will find you in a heart attack, cut down a dead tree, that was their tree.
Yeah.
I
If you ask them to cut it down, they won't do anything.
I do have an interesting Charlotte story for you. So my father-in-law and my mother-in-law live in Charlotte. My father-in-law, granted, he kind of earns the angst he gets because of how he chooses to live, because he purposely goes out of his way to alienate and aggravate people, including the city of Charlotte. He was cited for several junk vehicles and for taking down foliage. Well, he calls me up and asked me my opinion. I said, well, how do they prove it was a junk vehicle? How do they prove that the tree wasn't exempt from the code? You know, you need to start asking these questions. And he did his thing and ended up that City of Charlotte, as any professional, identified how they did X, Y, Z and worked with them to bring them into compliance. Guess what? No harm, no foul. The system worked the way it was designed to work. But 2 years later at a conference, I have one of the City of Charlotte reps sitting there going through a slideshow talking about, you know, what they have to deal with, what they don't have to deal with, and all of a sudden, oh geez, that's my in-laws' house. And ooh, oh, that's wrong. So I raise my hand and I start talking, yes, baiting, having a lot of fun with it. And eventually, at the end of the presentation, I said, so what did you actually make the McCabe's do? How do you know? I said, well, they're my in-laws. And you've just gone on record here at this little conference about how you're sticking it to a taxpayer.
Yeah.
I don't think that actually exudes the level of professionalism that we as zoning enforcement officers want to emulate. I had a lot of fun. I went out to lunch with the City of Charlotte staff. It was a little levity and a little humor, but yes, it goes a long way to explain the following. Your staff is professionally enforcing this code. No one person deserves to make greater use of their property than another. So we are trying to establish some equity and fairness as we're finalizing your UDO. And I know you understand that, I know you appreciate that, but as we move forward, we're trying to make the regulations as C-spot run as they can be so that number one, they're enforceable, Number two, it's easily identifiable and recognizable what the issue is. And it gives Jim the opportunity to work with those property owners, because code enforcement, now you got me on the soapbox, code enforcement is an educational opportunity. It's unfortunate educational opportunity where, Fred, I'm coming to you and saying, you're doing something illegal, you're doing something wrong. Well, you probably didn't know it was illegal. Okay, Fred, not a problem. Here's what the ordinance requires. Here's what I need to work with you on to bring it into compliance, and I'm gonna give you a certain amount of time to do that. You work with me, hey, Fred, thank you. You addressed this problem. Here's a letter of thanks, which is what I always recommend, and you're considered compliant now. It shouldn't be this draconian standing there with billy clubs and whatever, and make it an adversarial process until Fred wants to make it adversarial. If Fred tells me to pound sand and say, no, I'm not doing it, well, great, Fred, no problem. Here's your first $500 fine. I'll be back tomorrow with another $500 fine, and then the next day I'll be back with another $500 fine, and I'll play this game as long as you want. I'll fix it. Yes, you will. And Fred does have the right to come to the city and say, hey, I think Mr. Harvey, I don't think he's interpreting the code right. Well, that's Fred's right to do that. And I don't begrudge Fred the right to do that. I might snicker in the meeting before the Board of Adjustment, but it's his right. And if the board says I'm erred, guess what? I've erred. If the board says, nope, you haven't erred, it still doesn't mean I'm not going to work with that individual to bring it into compliance. Because my only interest, Jim's only interest is to allow people to make reasonable use of property where it's consistent with the code, period. And we're giving you the tools we think to make it clear, hopefully clearer, what is and isn't acceptable. Clear as mud, I know. Thank you for letting me get on my soapbox. So, asking you all to continue to review subdivision. In a couple of weeks, you'll be getting an email from me when the other chapters are uploaded, so you can start playing with those. But next month, we're going to focus solely on the land use plan and map. That's going to be the whole topic of conversation, and then we'll start closing out the UDO component of this project. And yes, to answer your question, there's an expectation that the plan be posted on the website and allow the residents to review it and get us some feedback before you make a recommendation, and ultimately before it goes to the elected officials. So this isn't going to be done in a vacuum. Not that you thought it was, but I respect the fact your concerns over not a lot of people participated in the survey process, and I respect and understand that. Unfortunately, you can't force the horse to drink the water once you let him do it. So without further ado, if there's no other questions, I really appreciate your all's time. I know you're all busy, and I know you all have other things to be doing. And I'll see you in 30 days, and this is still going to be a fun process. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mike. All right, the next thing on the agenda is to review the meeting minutes of last month's meeting of March 17th. So take a few minutes and read over that.
I'll just add parenthetically, you need to make sure that you harass Ed as he's recuperating, because he needs to be harassed.
Yeah, he had surgery today.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
Was it yesterday?
okay. Does anyone have any comments, thoughts on the meeting minutes? And if none, do I have a motion to accept the meeting minutes as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All right, so all approve, say aye. Aye. So that motion is approved. So public comments. Jim, you get to speak.
Go, Jim. You go. Then Spencer.
Keep
Y'all know
up,
any jokes?
keep up the good work.
Very good.
I got a good joke. You want to hear it? Why do porcupines always win in sports?
Nobody wants to get close to them?
Because they have the most points.
Yeah.
All right.
That was told in Rotary, so I figured I'd share with you.
Okay. So with that said, we're a little after 7. If nobody objects, I propose that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right. Meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you all again. I'm very appreciative of your time.
Thank you. How's Teresa doing?